Welcome to Colombia, a vast land of dazzling cities, luscious jungles, and rich oceans that all come together to form an agricultural hub for the world.
Colombia is a combination of many things. It's a beautiful countryside. You see beautiful contrasts of color and texture.
These natural resources provide the country's biggest exports. The ancient ground provides crude petroleum, while the storied mountains provide coal briquettes, and the fertile jungle gives forth cocoa beans to create coffee. However, these are exports of a changed Colombia, a Colombia that came together to fight a common cause so many years ago, a Colombia that took down a common villain. The truth is that there is a dark past that's burrowed behind these urban streets, a past that still haunts Colombian residents and the world. This dark past was the byproduct of a cocaine empire created by one man and one man only, Pablo Escobar. In the 1970s and 80s, Escobar was an extremely powerful drug lord and leader of one of the most powerful crime organizations of all time. He and his organization, or cartel as they're called, controlled all of the drug business in Colombia and almost all of the drug business in South America. Escobar prided himself on being the most ruthless in the drug industry and proved it time and time again throughout his career. He would constantly muscle his way into rival drug businesses by brutally murdering the head man in the most gruesome way possible. Sometimes their heads would be skewered on wood stakes, or Escobar would make their wife or children personally put a bullet in their heads, or else they would die themselves. Some think Escobar did this to show his dominance over rival drug leaders, while others think it was a way of scaring off anyone who thought they could stand in his way. But no matter what you think the reason was for Escobar performing these gruesome acts of murder to stay on top, one thing stays the same. Escobar saw killing as an art form and the drug business as a game. And Escobar was great at his game. So great that at the peak of his drug-selling career, he and his cartel controlled over 90% of the cocaine trafficked to America, and his cartel was spending $2,500 a week on rubber bands to hold their cash, and no one would attempt to stop Escobar. Not when he was starting out in the business, not when he was leaving the business, because if anyone did, they would be murdered in the cruelest of ways. But to fully understand the true nature of Escobar and his legacy on Colombia, we first have to look back at his past and what factors made him the villainous murderer and drug emperor he was in the 70s and 80s. Escobar was born right in the middle of one of the most violent times in Colombian history. These violent times were, of course, La Violencia. Directly translating to the violence, La Violencia is a word that's used to describe a long period of anarchy in Colombia caused by violent conflicts between the liberal and conservative political parties in government. It ended up being a fight between the poor and the wealthy, as the liberals represented a large amount of the citizens of Colombia who wanted to use the government to redistribute the wealth, while the conservatives represented the wealthy people who wanted to use their wealth to gain power in government. This disagreement between these two political parties resulted in violent riots across the nation that would shake Colombia for many years. There was little authorities could do to stop it because of Colombia's geography.
In a country like Colombia, where there are mountains and jungles, vast portions of the country never saw a policeman, never saw a court. And so when the violence started up, it spread throughout the country.
La Violencia also brought a gang of bandits called Los Bandidos, who pillaged the countryside, stealing from the rich and giving back to the poor. Escobar and his generation looked up to these gangsters and saw them as superheroes who fought for the well-being of all. Some think they were the reason for Escobar becoming a criminal. As Escobar grew up, he began to enjoy the criminal life that he was surrounded by in his city of Medellin. So when he reached high school, he started to smoke marijuana and deal it out to kids at his school. Eventually, rebellion struck Escobar, and he dropped out of high school to become a gangster on the streets, and Medellin was the perfect place for him to do that. Escobar started out his criminal career by stealing headstones with his friends from cemeteries and sandblasting the names clean and reselling them. But the crime business in Colombia was constantly evolving, and so was Escobar. He then stopped stealing headstones and moved on to selling fake lottery tickets on the streets of Medellin, and then that turned to robbing cars and selling them for their parts. By the time Escobar was robbing cars, he had already made a name for himself in the crime world of Colombia. But, like it always does, the business evolved into something that would make Pablo and his friends richer than their wildest dream. The mid-70s brought the new wonder drug cocaine that had a high demand all over the world because of its immense power.
And cocaine was a different kind of a drug. It filled the person who used it with a sense of power and energy and made them feel smarter and handsomer. People who started using it became addicted to it. So for that reason, many people in America in the 1970s and the 1980s were scraping together money to buy cocaine.
Escobar started out his cocaine selling career by taking over a local cocaine processing lab in Medellin. If any rival cartels developed a delivery route north in Colombia, Escobar would infiltrate their operation and demand 80% of their profits or he would kill them. Within half a year, Escobar controlled almost all the cocaine shipped out of Colombia to surrounding South American nations. But Escobar had bigger plans for expanding his business.
He perceived, along with his partners, Carlos Later and the Ochoa family, that there was a huge appetite in the United States for cocaine. When they started doing business, a lot of Americans thought that cocaine was pretty harmless. They didn't think it was addictive. They thought it was a party drug. So they started buying it.
Escobar hired a skilled Colombian pilot named Ruben who would ship low amounts of cocaine to the U.S. through Miami. While Ruben was shipping around 30 kilos when he started out, he soon became shipping 300 kilos within the next year, and Pablo's friends were enjoying their new gained wealth.
Yeah, Pablo Escobar began to make so much money. He had much more than he ever needed. And so he began looking for ways to spend it. And, he had no or very few responsibilities other than his family who were well cared for. He began to indulge in buying things like he imported hippos from Africa. He tried to create a big zoo for himself. He threw parties and brought in women and drugs and played, loved to play games, and he loved to smoke dope. He had basically the tastes of a petty criminal, and he had so much money he could pretty much buy anything he wanted.
The key to Escobar's larger-than-life enterprise to remain unstopped was simple: corruption.
Pablo Escobar was able to gain power because he had enough money to be able to buy people off.
Because Escobar had a multi-billion-dollar market that couldn't be stopped, illegal American dollars flooded Colombia's streets and brought fast wealth to the economy. Between 1976 and 1980, in the peak of the Medellin cartel, bank deposits in Colombia's 4 major cities more than doubled because of him. This made Escobar's public image among Colombian citizens great, and many of the poor Colombians saw him as a national hero. Even though Escobar's cocaine business made him above Colombian law and incredibly popular among these Colombian citizens, his thirst for power still wasn't quenched, so he decided to run for political office, and he knew exactly how to get elected.
I think Pablo Escobar, like any smart politician, will take advantage of the weakness in the system. And there was a big weakness. There was a need of the people. And he took advantage of that and was able to fill that by building schools and hospitals.
Once Escobar was in office, there was no one who could touch him. He was a god among Colombian citizens and a boss among Colombian politicians. Although there was one man that had enough nerve to stand up to Escobar, a journalist and politician named Luis Galan. While Escobar was in office, Colombian citizens believed that he had gained his wealth by investing in small businesses. Galan knew that Escobar had made his money from trafficking cocaine and exposed him on a national television broadcast. Escobar's image in Colombia was ruined, and he didn't have the support from the citizens he had before, so he began to demise. The Colombian government became sick of Escobar in the early 90s and formed a special force combat team called Los Pepes that shot Escobar trying to leave his house in 1993, thus ending the terror over Colombia.
By the time Pablo Escobar died, he was a has-been. Smarter, more organized, more business-like professionals had taken over the cocaine business. He got pushed aside by the Cali cartel, which was a group of businessmen who were just more educated and better at what they did.
The exchange of cocaine to America that Escobar brought to Colombia in the 1980s shook the nation, and drugs are still a big problem in Colombia today. Escobar remains today to be the world's greatest outlaw and drug kingpin of all time, and it's highly doubtful that anyone in the near future can reach the level of absolute evil that Escobar possessed.